This is the Doug Wright Show debate for Utah's 3rd Congressional District on KSL News Radio.
We so appreciate you being part of the program today, and we appreciate our candidates joining us here in studio for this live debate, 1 hour. We have all three of our candidates, as I mentioned, in the studio. So first and foremost, we've got so many things to cover. So I want to get right to this. We did a little drawing earlier to determine who would go first, second, and third. And as is the traditional case in debates, the person that goes first will then go last at the end on the closing statements. And I don't want to take up any more time than I need to here. We've kind of walked through the rules and regs with the candidates. We'll time each segment. We're going to be fairly sticklers on that time. So let's go with the opening statements. We've given 2 minutes to each of the candidates, and Chris Herrod was the winner of the drawing. And so you go first.
Well, Doug, thank you very much, and thanks for your listeners. You know, I know it's August, but it is an important election. Just a little bit about myself. I was raised here in Utah, grew up in Provo, and I grew up with a father that, when I was 2 years old, served in Vietnam. And so he came back and he taught me about the importance of making sure that we did our civic duty, how fortunate we were to live in this great country. I grew up going to the Freedom Festival, learning about people that had paid a tremendous price for freedom. And then when I was 16 years old, I had a friend that was going on a BYU study abroad, and they needed one more person to fill up the spot. And so at the age of 16, I applied to BYU, got a presidential scholarship, and studied in Europe for 6 months. That left an impression on me about how fortunate we are to be here in America. And so, fast forward, I served an LDS mission in Sweden, and then in 1992, I graduated from BYU with a master's in organizational behavior, undergrad in international relations, and I went over and taught at 2 different universities in the former Soviet Union. And you'll hear quite a bit about Russia in the news right now, and so I understand who Putin is. Putin is a chess player, and unfortunately, he's a very good chess player. And that's one of the strengths that I bring to this race is my international experience. Just kind of as a side note, as I was flying from Moscow to Kharkiv in Ukraine, I sat next to this gentleman from India, and he began to tell me about how great Ukraine was. But as I stepped off the plane, there was a beautiful young woman holding up a sign with my name on it. She was assigned by the university to pick me up at the airport, and I ended up marrying her 4 months later. And so my wife grew up in that system. As we talk about socialized medicine, we have numerous experiences with that. And so I look forward to having a great debate today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris Herrod. And now we go to luck of the draw is Tanner Ainge. Tanner, here's your 2 minutes.
Thanks, Doug. As we get started, I'd love to just introduce myself and my background and experience. I had after graduating from BYU, I had the fortunate experience of getting a job with the largest investment fund here in the state, where I started my career. And there I learned how to pick apart a business and go through financial statements line by line and industry trends and identify waste that can be cut and areas for improvement. And I've developed a financial acumen that I think we desperately need in Washington, D.C. with the spending problems that we have and our national debt crisis. And I want to take my skill set there. I also had the opportunity to go to law school in Chicago at Northwestern. And there I had the opportunity, after graduating, to advise some of the leading companies in this country, navigating them through federal laws and regulations that are burdensome. And I've seen firsthand how those regulations can stifle investment and growth. And I've also had to navigate them through the tax code, which is so onerous on taxpayers today. I also had the opportunity to work for a large healthcare company, where I got experience working with Medicare and Medicaid and some of our most vulnerable populations. So I understand healthcare. And for me, I've been busy building my career. I've been busy, my wife Heidi and I have been raising our 5 children, and never really anticipated running. But when Congressman Chaffetz stepped down, my wife and I looked at each other and said, this is the time to get off the sidelines and take our skill sets to Washington, D.C. to try to fix the dysfunction, cut taxes, cut spending, reduce the national debt. And I will work harder than anyone to make that happen. And I hope that as we discuss here today, I can earn some votes out there and earn the privilege of representing this district.
Thank you for that opening statement. And now to Mayor John Curtis. John, your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Doug. Great to be here with you as always. Well, I grew up in Salt Lake City. And
Mayor, we're going to need to
Okay.
get that microphone right over there.
Right there? Is
there
that
we
right?
go.
Can you
We'll
hear me
start the
better?
clock again.
Okay,
there we
thank
go.
you. Great to be here with you. I grew up in Salt Lake City. I met my wife at Skyline High School. I'm excited to tell everybody our first date was junior prom. And 39 happy years later, we have 6 children and almost 6 grandkids. After high school, I lived in Taiwan for 2 years, graduated from BYU, and then took a job with one of Utah's best homegrown companies, O.C. Tanner, which moved us out of state for 10 years. 20 years ago, we came back with our 6 children to Utah in pursuit of what I call my entrepreneurial dream. And with my partners, we grew a young, scrappy company that builds shooting ranges into an international success. And I'm proud that because of the equipment built right here in Utah, we're saving lives in the military and law enforcement. And those officers who train in our equipment come home just a little safer every day. For the last 8 years, it's been my honor to serve as the mayor of Provo. And it's no secret in this race that my time as Provo's mayor has been under attack by my opponents and these Washington, D.C. PACs who want to distort my record. So I'd like to set the record straight right here. Today, Provo's property tax rate is lower than it was when I took office 8 years ago. Today, Provo City has fewer employees per capita than it did 8 years ago. As a result, a stunning 84% of Provo residents say they get a good to excellent value for their tax dollar. Now, wouldn't that be amazing if we felt that way about our federal tax dollar? I'm proud of the tone of my campaign. Everywhere I go, I'm thanked for running a Utah-based, Utah-funded, and Utah-principled campaign. For the last several weeks, I've personally been the target of over $700,000 out-of-state dollars targeted at destroying my reputation. The best thing they can find to slander me with is this. Almost 2 decades ago, like Jason Chaffetz, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump, I actually spent some time on the dark side and as a Democrat. Call me what you want, but I challenge you to find an elected leader who has a more solid record of conservative governance. Thank you.
Thank you all for your opening statements. And again, we will rotate through. We started with Chris Herrod. The first question will go to Tanner Ainge, then we'll go to John Curtis, and then back to Chris, and we'll rotate through like that. Again, we did composites of, and I'm trying to capture the true spirit of the questions that came in, because obviously we had many people expressing concerns about the same thing and wanted questions to the same thing. So this one came generally from Tammy, David, and Christine. Tammy said, how do you plan to compromise and work to get meaningful legislation to help all Americans, not this red and blue crap? Quoting directly, we need some purple people. David added, tired of the tug-of-war, zero-sum game on every issue. Christine added, she talked of the voice of reason that is needed in this district and wondered which of you, this is a quote, is most partisan, end quote. So, Tanner, you get that one.
Great, thank you. Look, I think that whenever we're looking at these type of questions, we should look at the Constitution. And I believe in limited government, conservative principles. But the Constitution itself was a great compromise. And I think we need to remember that. And also we are supposed to, the state is supposed to be the primary governing institution and not the federal government. And the states are meant to be the laboratories for democracy. And so if we were to return to a federalism system with states' rights, then we would have the opportunity for states to make the policies that make sense. Here in Utah, we could continue to demonstrate to the rest of the country that conservative, pro-growth economic policies work, and they lift everyone in the process. And other more liberal-leaning states can pass those policies. But in the federal government, I will work with anyone that I need to start reducing our spending, reducing our national debt, repeal and replace Obamacare. And it doesn't matter to me what party or what caucus they're in. If they're part of a creative solution that will lead to a better outcome, I'm ready to talk to them.
And now we go to John Curtis. John, your 1 minute.
Thank you, Doug. I'm really proud as my time as mayor that we've been able to do that. We've been able to bring people together with extremely diverse opinions, sit around a table and talk about what we share in common. And I find when we do that, we're able to accomplish amazing things. I look back about what we've done in the city of Provo, and we do hard things. And this will sound funny, but we put roads in people's backyards. And we do things that people find very difficult. And by bringing them together, sitting down in a room and finding those things that we share in common, we're able to find solutions that are best for the community. I'm confident that given the opportunity to work in Washington, I'll be able to equally deal with those difficult problems with people with similar mindsets who want to solve problems here in the United States.
Thank you. We go next to Chris Herrod. Chris, your 1 minute.
Part of the issue is knowing what to compromise on and what not to compromise on. as Tanner mentioned, the Constitution kind of sets down the ground rules for what the federal government is supposed to do. When I was in the state legislature here, I did found a state sovereignty movement, and so a lot of those issues would be much better dealt with here in the state. But we have big issues back in D.C., and for example, you look what's happened with Obamacare. The problem that you have is that there's two different systems. There's a socialized medicine system, and then there's the free market. And certain things that we cannot compromise on is we need to make sure that we keep part of the healthcare free market. Otherwise, we will lose the benefit. And so, I was greatly disappointed when they were, the Republicans have been running for the last 7 years on repealing Obamacare, and then we didn't repeal it. And so we need to make sure that we know when to compromise, and I have a record of being able to do that, and then when not to compromise and make sure that we repeal Obamacare.
One thing that I failed to mention to our listeners is that after each question, we will allow a 30-second rebuttal, but if they're necessary. Otherwise, we'll move to the next question. So if anybody feels the need, I'm not sure if we answered Christine's question of who is the most partisan. Anybody want to volunteer on that? All right, let's move to the next one. This one came from Barbara, Desiree, Russell, and Steve, and others. And actually, it was so complex that I actually broke it into two parts. So I'm calling this one 2A, and then we'll have 2B in just a moment. We'll start with John Curtis on this one. But Barbara articulated it well. And she said she believes it's shameful that the Medicaid expansion still hasn't been addressed. Utah has been paying for this all these years, and no benefit for our needy and hardworking citizens. What are the plans for this money that is back in Washington for the Medicaid expansion, especially in light of what we're dealing with? We're going to deal with health care more generally in a moment, but Medicaid expansion particularly. And Mayor Curtis, your 1 minute.
Well, I need to give a shout out to our governor and state legislature. They've worked hard to find the right answer for Utah. And it's not as simple as just taking more money. So many strings are attached to that they're really trying to do what's best for us. But at the same time, I have to point out the dysfunction of Washington, D.C. We just are not getting the interest of the American people in mind when we work the way that we're working back there. We're putting large corporations, healthcare insurer companies ahead of the American people. And the first thing I'd like to do is turn that around and make sure we're taking care of the American people first.
All right. Now let's go to Chris Herrod. Chris?
One of the problems that a lot of people don't understand with the Medicaid expansion is the number of rules that came with that. And you look at the states that have expanded under Medicaid expansion, but the costs were not capped. So you look at what happens in Ohio. Ohio took the Medicaid expansion, but now that after they get the free 3 years, they're going to have to kick in, and Ohio's going to have a deficit now. And so I give kudos to the Utah legislature for resisting that, the Medicaid expansion, without being able to have a cap, because you look at part of the state budget that's growing at the highest rate is the Medicaid portion, and so they've resisted it just because they didn't know the cost. I believe that money should be block granted to the states and then let the states take care of it. We know how best to take care of Utahns here in the state of Utah.
Let's go to Tanner Ainge now. Tanner, your 1 minute.
The Medicaid program is a perfect example of how dysfunctional Washington is. This program comes from federal funds, but is supposed to be administered at the state level. And here at our state, the state legislature identified abuse that was happening at the emergency room. They found 600 people who spent more than 100 days in the emergency room. That's hard to do. And as they looked into it, they said, okay, well, why is this happening? And they found out that the incentives were such that there was a $3 copay, whether they went to a primary care physician or urgent care or the emergency room. And so our state came up with a plan and said, hey, let's just shift that a little bit, increase the copay by a couple of dollars at the emergency room to incentivize people to go the proper routes. And instead, the federal government came in and said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And so in our state, we're continuing to waste this money. The states can do so much better if those funds are pushed back to the states with no strings attached and let them craft a creative solution.
Would anybody care for a rebuttal on that one? Okay, then let's go to part two of this. And this primarily was crafted by Russell, who wrote in. Rule number one, you cannot mention the Democrats and shift blame to them. but what are your plans to present a viable plan on health insurance reform in this country? Not to criticize, not to point fingers, but what are you constructively going to present? And I'll put a little tag on this from Desiree, who said, how do you envision public-funded health care? What should it actually look like? And so on this one, if I'm keeping track, we're back with you, Chris.
You know, one of the first things we need to realize is that socialized medicine is not the panacea that many people show that it is. You know, my wife grew up in the Soviet Union. My wife has a 7-inch scar that should be a 1/4-inch scar, and I can give you horror story after horror story that system of government does not work. And so we need to do what's made our system of government the best in the world, and that is to make sure that we keep free market alive. I'm a big believer in health savings accounts. I personally want to have a catastrophic plan and then be able to go out and shop. You look at the part of healthcare that's the best in the state or in the United States right now, that the costs have been contained, and that's where insurance and the government hasn't been involved. LASIK used to be $5,000 an eye. Now you can get it for $200 an eye. I personally wouldn't go to the $200 an eye guy, but I would go to the $1,000 an eye guy. And so we need to make sure that we bring in market forces for the healthcare.
Okay, and let's go to Tanner Ainge on this one. Tanner, 1 minute.
Yeah, when you look at the failures of the Affordable Care Act, not only has it failed in delivering its promises that our premiums would go down, instead they've skyrocketed, and that we'd be able to keep our same doctors and our same plans, but there's also been a withdrawal from the system of a lot of the insurance plans. So many counties across the country, there's only one insurer. They have a monopoly. We need to reintroduce choice and competition. And I agree that health savings accounts are one great way of doing that. You know, right now, if you go to your doctor and you ask them, how much does this procedure cost? How much does this exam cost? They can't even tell you. And then it takes months after you visit to sort through the various bills. And that's because of a third-party payer system. If we take a health savings account and people can put their own money in a tax-free account, and then they get to purchase health care just like they purchase other services and products in our lives. And I think that if we can increase the amount that people can put in and help employers get more into their employees' plans, this can really shift us back to a consumer-driven marketplace.
Thank you, Tanner. And your 1 minute, John Curtis.
Thank you. I'd like to share just briefly what we did in the city of Provo. 8 years ago, like everybody else, we were facing double-digit premium increases. And we had an employee base who didn't have a lot of accountability with their health decisions. We made some significant changes and changed things around. We introduced choice to our employees. We introduced higher deductibles. We introduced HSAs and got them more engaged in their health care decisions and gave them more information. Last year, our premium increase tracked with inflation. And to me, all the solutions have to deal with market forces. They have to deal with choice, and they have to deal with accountability for those choices.
Any rebuttal on that? If I might have an indulgence here, I'd like to jump in. And for those who have listened to this show regularly, and for those, I believe I've chatted with most of you about this, whether it's been in an editorial board meeting or here on the air. But a straight-up question. Do you believe that we can actually have a workable healthcare system hammered out for the United States of America with only one party passing it? In other words, with no bipartisan support. And we'll start this time with Tanner Ainge.
You know, I think that the bill that was introduced through the reconciliation process that would have only required 50 votes would have significantly improved from where we're at right today. Because under Obamacare, we're continually seeing people pull out of these plans, and it's getting worse and worse. But I'm supportive of having a plan, a bipartisan plan. And it also, I don't think that it needs to be a federal one-size-fits-all solution. That's the problem. Utah is so different from Vermont. And so if we can find a plan that allows states to have their flexibility, then I think that Utah will have the very best plan in the country, just like we have the best results in almost everything else. And other states who want to use a single payer, others might struggle, but at least that'll be their right at the state level. So I think that that is the way that we actually get something passed that will work.
Can it, though, work long-term with no bipartisan support?
Like I said, we can get something passed on a bipartisan solution. And I think that a one-size-fits-all on a federal level isn't the right solution, but if states have flexibility, then yes, and we get bipartisan support for that, I think that will work and will be a long-term fix.
Thank you. Let's go to John Curtis for his minute.
Sure, I believe that we could make it work, but I don't think it would be our best effort. And for 7 years, we Republicans complained about the Democrats forcing through legislation without a Republican vote. And then we turned around and did the exact same thing. And we passed a bill without transparency. We passed it without thoughtfulness. We passed it without being careful. And we passed it without a single Democratic vote. And, well, we tried to pass it, and we were not successful. To say we have a monopoly on good ideas, to say we're the only ones that want free market principles, to say that we're the only ones that care about the American people is probably not realistic.
Let's go to Chris Herrod for his minute.
Well, I think it is important to look at how it started, and it was passed by one party. And I think there's never been an entitlement program that's been successful and passed by only one party, and so it started off at as a very problem. The difficulty that you have, though, is should the federal government be doing that in the first place? And I believe that it should be pushed back to the states.
Any rebuttals here? Anything? Okay. The next question is something that came up over and over and over. I'm not sure if it was the top of the hit parade, but it was close. It was close. And Alice, along with Ty and many others, articulated it. Alice said it this way. Here's my question. Overall, there has been engagement in very negative campaign brochures, primarily against Mayor John Curtis. Why? Can't you just stick to the issues without trying to paint your opponents in such a, this is in quotes, dark light? This has not helped your cause. Ty said, why are there so many negative ads? And we'll start, just by luck of the draw, with Mayor John Curtis here.
So not only are there negative ads, but these are financed by people out of state in Washington, D.C. And in Utah, we're tired of Washington, D.C. telling us what to do. To me, this is a pivotal issue in the campaign. What do these people out of state want? Why are they financing my opponent's attacks on me and my character? I've served as hard as I could for 8 years. I can't imagine to tell you what it's like to have $600,000-$700,000 targeted at me, telling people what is true is not true. Not only are they negative, they're false and they're not true. They're coming from out of states. This would be a perfect time for my opponents to stand up and say it's wrong. We denounce it. We agree that they're false and untrue. Let's hear it, guys. How do you feel?
And luck of the draw has it go to Chris Herrod next.
Well, first off, it needs to be said, we don't have control. I don't have control of the outside PAC. The problem, though, that I have, and I've always faced that, when I was a Utah legislature, I was always beat up in the off years as being too conservative. And then when election time came, everybody said, well, we're all conservative. And part of the problem, though, that John has kept saying is that he has a conservative record. It is not conservative to pass BRT. I'm a longtime Provo resident. BRT is going to tear up the streets. It used eminent domain. And so there are differences. The problem that you have is when people do it, I don't believe that it's negative to compare things, but some of the snarkiness of some of the things I haven't appreciated. But there are differences in records, and those things are okay to talk about.
BRT being bus rapid transit, just in case. Okay, Tanner, let's go to you for your 1 minute. Tanner Ainge.
I don't think there's place in politics for personal attacks. That hasn't been my approach. It's not what my campaign's been about. And I have taken a lot of incoming flack from both other campaigns and from outside groups. And for me, I'm not complaining about it. I think that's part of the process. As Heidi and I decided to get into this race, we knew that it's time to kind of have some thick skin. And whoever wins this is going to have to go against a Democrat who's got $1 million in the general election and then go fight in Washington, D.C. And if you think you're going to be able to cut spending without taking a lot of criticism from people who support those pet spending projects, then you're mistaken. And so for me, it's not negative campaigning, but as Chris said, I will point out the differences in record. That's fair game. And John Curtis has a very different record than how he's portrayed it. And he tells people to look at his record, and so we're helping them look at that record.
Any rebuttals here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Chris, if you think it's wrong, say it right now. Tell them to stop, and they'll stop. Tell them it's false, and tell them it's not accurate. And Tanner, if you don't believe in personal attacks, why are brochures coming out with your picture and a nice family and my photo photoshopped with lies? You tell me that.
Let's go to Chris first.
Well, but you know, like I said, I do not control the outside PACs. I can't even have communication.
Chris, tell him right now. Tell him to stop.
On which issue, John?
Any of it.
You have raised taxes. You used eminent domain, which
Chris, that's a lie.
Which is
you
not
tell him right now.
John, it is not conservative to eminent domain numerous people's pieces of property in Utah.
BRT does not use any more eminent domain than any state road going in the state. It's a lie. Tell them right now to stop, and they'll stop.
It is not conservative to go after $75 million of, quote, free grant money.
Chris, you passed in the state legislature the bill that funded BRT.
No, we did not.
Before I was even mayor.
That is simply not true. That gave the cities the option and the county the option to vote on it, but Chris, it did not force it, John.
Chris, the bill that you passed didn't even have a voter option in it. SB 245 funded BRT without a voter option.
It did not, John.
Okay, let's get a response from Tanner Ainge here.
Yeah, look, I'm not running a negative campaign. For me, I think John looks great in that picture. He's a good-looking guy, but his record, he's increased taxes and he's increased spending as mayor, and so I'm not going to do those things. I'm running on a platform of cutting spending. Excuse me, let me finish. Cutting spending, cutting taxes, reducing the national debt, and I don't have to go looking for these things. I have people on the campaign every day who come to me and they say, "Hey, we're supporting you because we think you have the experience and the conservative principles to represent this district, and also because we don't want John Curtis, because we've lived under him in Provo when he was mayor, and these are the things that happened, and we want you to highlight this record."
Tanner, if you'd lived in Utah for more than 8 months, you would know that the mayor of Provo has no ability to raise taxes. That's a lie. If you would Photoshop me, the least you could do is put me in a suit that fits.
One quick question. We're going to break for our news. That's the only break we're taking this hour here at the bottom of the hour. But I live in the 3rd Congressional District, and I've received all of these mailers, and I, too, was taking some comfort in the fact that most of them were coming from a PAC. But I have seen some that have come directly from the offices and are attributed to the particular campaign. So are none of you running these ads? And even Mayor Curtis has alluded to these are outside PACs. Are they all outside PACs? I've received some fairly negative stuff in my mailbox.
Well, I'm happy to say right now, like I just said, to me it's not negative to talk about record. And if you look at Mayor Curtis's record, everything that we say is true. And this is everyone who lives in Provo knows about these things. It's not true.
It's a lie, and you know it. It's distortions. It's half-truths. Tanner, you don't even understand how the city of Provo works. How can I raise a tax? Which one have I raised?
Property taxes increased during your time as mayor.
Property
and also,
taxes are
excuse
lower.
Me, you asked a question, so I'll finish. You'll also have the ability to increase utility fees, which you've done, and that's a practice that is frowned upon by many because it hides the tax. And it allows you to take those increased utility fees and then transfer them back into the general fund. And when you were mayor,
so when I say you're not being honest, this is a perfect example. Property taxes are lower. You look on the state website in Provo City than they were 8 years ago. It's a fact. Of course utility rates go up. You're telling me your utility rates don't go up in Alpine? I've told you that before. Chris pays less for power in Provo than you do in Alpine. It's a bargain.
Okay, I've got to jump in here. Just a final quick comment here to try to keep this as fair as possible.
You know, like I said, the only thing I know, I'd like to see, I'm happy to talk. I'd like to see the one that was sent out by my campaign that's negative.
The one let me be clear about that. The one that I got did not come from your campaign.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. We'll take a break. We've got other questions coming up here at KSL News Radio. Thanks so much for being part of this 3rd District Republican primary debate. We have much more coming your way, all here at KSL News Radio. We're a little past the bottom of the hour. It is 10:34.